Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Stakeholder Whispering Live, where I am always here every week, and you're probably getting sick of looking at me, but I like to come and talk about stakeholder whispering, which of course is the name of my new book, all on the topic of how do we have conversations with stakeholders to help them figure out what they actually need from us before we do what they've asked of us, because a lot of times those two aren't necessarily the same thing. Um, as always, I have a guest with me here today, Christina Charenkova, who is a fellow LinkedIn Learning instructor and is an organizational change advisor. But as always, I will ask Christina to introduce herself a little bit more fully. But first, Christina, thank you for being here. Welcome. And I'm looking forward to speaking with you.
Oh, thank you so much, Bill. It's so nice to be here. I'm looking forward to the conversation as well. Thank you for the intro. Yes, as you said, I've been in the change space for the past 20 years or so. I love being in the change space. Change and project management are kind of my calling, I think, because it's all about people. And, when it comes to decision making, when it comes to change making, when it comes to points in time, people always, and how we speak to people is always the critical path. So I love studying it. I love discovering more of how to do it better, and I love teaching people how to do it better. So that's where I thrive, and that's where I feel I can make the most change to people's work and day lives.
I love it. It's so interesting. When I talk to people who are in the change management field,
Mm,
some of them are very, like you just mentioned, sort of project management, project management. Others are like learning and development, learning and development. Like there's always like different sort of points of view in change management and sort of like the area in which people like to sort of focus or specialize or whatever.
mm.
So it's a very interesting field because it's like change is this incredibly dynamic, interesting thing. It is all about people. And does change come from above? Does it come from below? What does change really look like? It's such a complicated, interesting area to be in.
Yeah, and I think people can get a little bit fragmented about, I'm in the project management space and I don't do change, or I'm in sales and marketing and I don't do change. Essentially, we all do change every day, right? And we all have to have conversations with people that move them from swaying to one part to the next part, from transitioning from, an old way of doing things to a new way of doing things. So I kind of take it with a pinch of salt and I just nod. And internally, I know we all go through the same thing. And it's same personally as well. We all go through changes all the time. And whether you see yourself as being prone to change or not prone to change, I think we all do it. We just like to put a different frame around it. I teach that we all are change makers and we all have the power to frame it the way we hold the power, essentially. So, um, you know, if if there's a big corporate organizational change going on and we feel like change is being done to us, then that's not a fun place to be. But essentially, we all hold the power to see that as being a growth opportunity, as being a development opportunity, as being an opportunity to learn how to ask more clarifying questions or to learn how to get your point across, even though you feel like you're being in a spot where you're not being heard.
Yeah, that's
So,
that great point. Which brings up what we're here to talk about, right? How do
yes.
we ask clarifying questions? How do we really engage with our stakeholders to figure out what they need from us? So, I know you came armed with a couple of anecdotes. I'll leave it up to you. Do you want to start with a success story, a failure story? What would you like to share with us?
Yeah, thank you. It's all about how we talk and communicate and ask people the questions, right? So I brought some examples that are I would classify as mistakes, failures, and I do that purposefully because I think the most impactful lessons are the ones that we learn through making mistakes. And I encourage people to not be afraid of making mistakes, but to learn through that, through growth, through that, and the lessons do stick with you for a lot longer.
Yeah.
So, the first example that I wanted to bring was something really early from my career, and it's stuck with me ever since. Right, it was that powerful. I was working for a big consulting company, and I was part of a really large project that was doing organizational redesign. A
Mhm.
lot of people were being laid off. It was quite a sensitive organizational change. And I was being brought as the change manager in charge of communicating some of the important messages. Now, I came onto that project a little bit later, so I needed to get up to speed and I need to get to know the stakeholders, the stakeholder pool, what were the important things to them, and how do I communicate, what is the language, and so on. And that was all great. Like, I was given the time to do that, to understand my audience, to understand like the local lingo, to understand, how to say things, what's appropriate, what's not appropriate. The one thing that I did not do was to put a spell check on my communication. And it was part of me being new on the project. I received a new laptop, new equipment. Um, and as you can probably tell, I'm not a native English speaker. So having the spell check is something that is essential now for me, just to make sure that this is such a basic thing, but it's so important. And my project lead at the time was also a non-English speaker, non-native English speaker. So although we did all the checks and balances, I sent my draft communications to my project lead. They were checked, the tone, the message was right, everything was right. But we made some really silly spelling mistakes and they weren't picked up. We sent it to the business leader who was in charge of sending those communications out. They went out to quite a big pool of people that were being laid off, and we got in big trouble. We got in
Mm,
big trouble because it just undermined the skill that we as consultants were bringing onto the project, and it undermined the fact that, you know, by not doing the basic things right, we didn't know what we were doing. And of
yeah,
course, that wasn't the case, but it just sent out that message.
yeah,
So it was really, really impactful learning. One, because we messed up. Two, because obviously it put us in a really bad light in front of our clients. Um, and how we solved it was by going to the business leader who was in charge of that and having a really honest and open and sincere conversation with that person. And we said, we were just really transparent. We said, we messed up, but let us work together to figure out what is the next step. How do we make it right? How do we get the people on board again? And that was the whispering part, I suppose. It wasn't
mm,
through escalating and taking us off the project and getting new people involved and so on. That wasn't really part of the solution. It was, okay, we know that mistakes are being made, but let's move forward. We're here to support that transition. We're here to support the people. We're bringing very varied skill sets on this project. So let's make sure that we can all use that and strive to an outcome together. And
yeah.
we, in a way, we were lucky because that business owner was open to that conversation. But I know a lot of people wouldn't have been either. So,
Was
um,
gonna say, I mean, it's so hard, and especially you said it was early in your career, so you're young. I assume you're coming in
relatively.
new to things, yeah, and you have to have trust, right? That you gaining trust with a new client, a new engagement like that is so hard, and to be trusted enough to do the work in the first place, and then you make a mistake, trust
Yeah,
is broken, and to
yes,
be able to get past that and regain that trust is really hard sometimes. That's
it's
really great that,
very hard.
and it is. It's like some people will be more open to that than others. Some people, yeah,
Yeah.
you'll never regain their trust. Like that's
Mm.
it, you're done. Or at least it's very hard to.
Yes. And I guess that's part of, that stakeholder whispering technique and the book that you've written is how do we make sure that people really understand where we're coming from and what do they need to achieve, and how can we help them achieve that? So it was those conversations, those open and honest conversations that, yeah, we know people are really disheartened by this change, and we know we've made a spelling mistake on this particular communication. Is that the most important thing in the project? No, it's not. Okay, let's move past that. Let's describe what the most important things are, and how do we get people to move through and to help support them through that transition.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's great. That is a good key fundamental lesson. It's interesting because like the whispering, as you said, happened after that mistake was made in a way and to
Mm,
regain that trust. Um, but trust is this precious, precious commodity. And
yes.
you know, how do you have those conversations when that trust has been broken? Like that first, I imagine the first 30 seconds of that conversation were really tense, like in your mind anyways, like, okay, how are we going to get past that hump to really get this person
Right.
back on board?
Yeah. And
Yeah.
also, the feeling of guilt and feeling like we didn't do what we were meant to do is really overpowering. So you kind of have to step through that yourself and go, okay, I need to hold my hands up. I need to accept that I haven't done the right thing. That's okay, because my intent wasn't to harm anyone. My
Yeah.
intent was to help people.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we were really lucky. The business leader saw that and was open to the conversation. So we did that. I think, to lead on to my second example, um, the other side of getting people on board is to there's a really good saying by let me just remember the name. I think it's Matt Abrahams. He teaches strategic communication at Stanford. I think he has a saying something like, you know, don't build a clock, just tell the time. So you
Mm,
don't need to go and collect all of these stories about what happened and why it happened, but just tell what happened. And
right.
equally, when we're communicating about change or about transformation or about anything that is of significant importance to employees or to stakeholders, is, be brief in your communication. Tell them what they need to know, but you don't need to tell them all of the background story. You don't need to
Yeah.
necessarily go into all of this detail, because people just get confused and people get lost. And, the commodities of our time now are time and attention. If
Yeah.
you can get people's time and people's attention, it's brief. And for that brief moment, you have to catch their attention. And the way we can do that is by telling them exactly what is happening and why it's important for them. So whether that's, a quick update with a leader, whether that's communicating to your team, whether that's communicating to a large pool of people, is to like get that attention as soon as you can.
Yeah. That's a great one. One of my favorite quotes of all time is, I would have written a shorter letter, but I didn't have the time.
That
Right.
that is so powerful. I've heard that.
Yeah.
Yes, I
And
love it.
so, the question is, okay, so you're whispering, which takes nuance, which
Yes.
usually implies more words, more context, more of everything, but you do have to be brief and concise and get to the point. So, how do you do that? Do you have any sort of magic tricks for doing that well?
My magic trick is just practicing. It's practicing, and there's no getting around that. And I start by writing out a much longer piece and then cutting out what I don't need, and
Yeah.
cutting out and cutting out. And I go through a number of iterations before I'm happy with the final outcome, before it has the right components that I think are right. And then I get other people to review that. So I
Yeah.
get, the people that have a stake in the actual transformation or project, or, whatever we're trying to communicate, and say, does that communicate the message well enough and concise enough so it doesn't take too much time to read? I mean, don't you hate it when you get these massive emails? And I'm sorry, he, HR people, when they want to communicate something, are known for sending really long communication pieces, and the action will be right at the bottom. It's
Yeah.
like, okay, this is great, but I'm not sure this first part of the email, which takes 10 minutes to read, is actually bringing any value. So, like, what is the key piece of information we want stakeholders to take away, and what is the action for them?
Yeah.
What is it? Why is it important? And what is the action? I think those are the kind of the structure that I follow. And then I start and I iterate it until I feel like it's concise enough to go out and to be really clear. And I try to
Yeah.
not use buzzwords. I try not to use any um, complicated language, anything that would, I don't mention frameworks. I don't mention different terminology. It just has to be really clear and really concise. And then what is the action?
Yeah. Now, do you find that your stakeholders, when you're working with them and they're trying to implement this change across this organization, and you're trying to convince them, okay, this communication needs to be concise, to the point, and have those three things in that particular order, do you find that they tend to want to include more and more and more stuff, or is it really depend on the person?
Yeah, I tend to find that people in the business want to include everything, including the kitchen sink.
Yeah.
We need to give all of this background information, and we need to include examples. And yes, and essentially, yes, you do need to include some of those elements, but not in every communication, right? What is
Yeah.
it important for this particular point in time? What is the action that's important to be taken for this particular point in time? Let's make sure that we get those basics right, and then we can give people the background. It really depends on the journey as well, and the duration of the project,
Yeah.
and the stakeholder pools, the knowledge that they have around what's happening and why is it happening. um, and then I think the other mistake that people make is, they go on feeling. I feel like people need to know more. But
Mm,
actually, do people have enough information? So it's really critical that we do little surveys or little polls to get to know what people actually know and where is the information lack. So then
yeah.
we can answer those needs adequately rather than just bringing a lot of unnecessary work and necessary information that people would just ignore.
Yeah. It's such an interesting, difficult thing to do in your world, though, because to your point earlier, like this can be a very difficult transition for people, right? Like,
Yes.
in the first example, like there's all these people getting laid off. There's this huge change
Yeah.
happening. It's very uncomfortable sometimes. And so there's this tension between, I got to give these people a quick hit, like this is what's going on, this is what you need to know, this is what you need to do, which I
Mm.
get the conciseness. At the same time, you got to inject that humanity and some of the extra context so they do understand why, and da 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 da. And
Yeah.
so that must be really hard to find that balance for yourself, but then also for you to get to work with your stakeholders to help them find that balance.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. I think you're spot on. But also don't forget it's a journey, right? We don't start with one communication and that's be it all and end it
Right.
all. We start with the story. We start at the beginning. We explain the why, and then we move people through that journey. So
Yeah.
what is important in each of those points in the journey. And then there's many ways that you can get to a destination. It's a bit like Google Maps, right?
Yeah.
You get different routes. So some people just want to go the more scenic route. Some people want to go the most direct route. It really
Yeah.
depends on the context. It really depends on the transition, on the people, and on the business leader that's in charge of that transition.
And so if you have a business leader who thinks and maybe comes to you and says, okay, I think you need to say these 47 things in this one communication. I want the first communication to solve all the problems and just make the change happen. Go. How do you convince them? Like, what's that whispering that happens to get that person to understand? No, no, this is a journey. We're going to do 12 communications over the next 3 months
Yeah.
because, yeah, here's why. How do you do that?
Well, there's different ways, and I suppose first of all, understanding what is motivating that business leader to want to say those 47 different things. And going back to my previous point, there's a lot of feeling involved in change. Like people feel emotions about change. So,
Yeah,
maybe that person feels like his teams or his stakeholders don't have that information. So then we would go to, okay, well, let's actually talk about data points here. where is the data point that tells us we need to say those 47 things? Let's do a quick poll and understand what is the current understanding about the project. What exactly do we need to communicate? Well, who you know, different groups maybe need different types of information. So it's kind of having those clarifying questions with that particular business leader, and again that whispering sort of session with them to understand, okay, what is the outcome that we're trying to achieve? Yeah, we're trying
Yeah.
to get from A to B, but there's many ways to get from A to B.
Right.
Your feeling is that we're at A at the moment and people don't have any information. Let's make sure that that's actually the deal. Um,
Yeah.
so, trying to, I always say, let's see what the data tells us. And I love that because you're a data whiz and
Yeah.
you can really cleverly represent information in your courses. With change, it's not so much about representing the data, but it's about what is the data telling us about what people know and people understand. And then how do we craft our journey along that?
Yeah. I love it. I think change is so interesting because it is emotions also. It's
Yes,
data, it's
yes,
emotions, and it's
yes,
finding the perfect blend of it all so that people
yes.
feel okay about this difficult thing happening. But you're making these decisions based on real information, not just
Yeah,
willy-nilly, throwing spaghetti at the wall or whatever.
yeah, yeah.
Well, this has been great. Christina, I want to thank you very much for being here. Before we go, any last little nuggets of wisdom you want to share? Like that one special thing that makes your life easier, better when you're working with your stakeholders?
I'll share one of my favorite quotes is by Franklin Roosevelt, who says, "Be sincere, be brave, be seated." So I always think about that. And yeah, I think whenever people think about stakeholder whispering or communicating with other people, think about what is your audience, what do they need right now, and how do you best convey that message in a concise way so it captures their time and attention.
I love it. Good advice beyond stakeholder whispering. That's just good communications advice overall. Excellent. Well,
So good
thank
to
you
be
very
here, Bill.
much.
Thank you.
All right. And everybody else, we'll see you again next week for another episode of Stakeholder Whispering Live. Have a great week.
Bye, guys.